In this video, I want to talk a little bit about remote control repair. Surprisingly, a large percentage of the customers that call me up wanting a service call don't actually have a problem with their TV, but rather they're misusing their remote control. I'm surprised at how many times that's happened. I'll go out to their house and I'll find out just simple operator error. As many of you know, a lot of these modern day remotes are capable of controlling up to 5 different devices: the cable box or the satellite box, the TV, the VCR, etc. And sometimes the customer will simply push the wrong button. They'll push the TV button when they're trying to control the satellite box. And aside from those simple problems, every once in a while I do get an actual repair that I have to do on a remote control, and I'm going to show you some of the techniques I use and how you can go about repairing your own remote control. Now, there's two types of remote controls I see a lot of in this business. One of them is the infrared remote control, where you've got an invisible light beam that sends out a code that your TV or VCR or whatever happens to read, and you can actually see it with a video camera when I push the button here, but believe it or not, I can't see this with my naked eye. The other type of remote control I see from time to time are remote controls that put out radio frequency energy, where they don't put out any light source, but they put out a transmitted signal that's picked up by the receiver. Now, I'm going to start by talking about the most common, and that's the infrared remote controls. I think the most common problem I see with these remote controls is that the customers often spill something inside of them and they're totally unaware of it. In fact, many times I'll tell the customer that they've done this and they don't believe me until I show them the evidence. If you get a remote control where you have a situation where a couple of buttons don't work, the first thing you want to do is open it up and find out what's going on, and look for any residue you might find inside. Now, if you've ever had to take one of these apart, you know it's rather challenging. Sometimes they have a couple screws you take out, but aside from the screws, you usually have to pry these apart. And I find the best tool to do so is just an ordinary chisel, and to put it in the little slot here and to turn it sort of clockwise and counterclockwise and try to pry this thing apart. There we go. And what you'll often find when you look inside is there'll be a circuit board, of course, but you'll find there'll often be a residue between the carbon electrodes here and the keypad, and that'll cause it to malfunction. And that residue could be Coca-Cola, cat urine, coffee, plant water, who knows, but it's good for business. Now, cleaning one of these out isn't rocket science. I just take ordinary dish soap, soap it up real well, and wash it off. Now, it may surprise you that I submerge this whole thing underwater, but I do, and it's never been a problem because I dry it all real well before I put it all back together. The same with the keypad. I usually just submerge the whole thing after I soap it up. Sometimes I'll do it 2 and 3 times just to make sure I get all that residue out of there. One thing you want to watch out for is not to scrub the surface real hard. You could easily wear these carbon electrodes off the circuit board, or circuit traces, whatever you want to call them, and that would be a bad thing. If that happens, that can be a bad problem. In fact, sometimes I'll find a remote that's got Coca-Cola or something that's been in there so long it actually eats away at the carbon electrodes, and when that happens, I'm not sure how you can repair one of these babies. Anyway, go on to the next segment here. You know, as far as drying it out afterward goes, I usually take the air hose and I'll just blow it out real well, make sure I get any water that may have gotten underneath the IC. And same with the keypad. And then sometimes I'll use a hair dryer too, especially if I'm at a customer's home and I forget to bring any kind of an air compressor with me. I'll just take out the hair dryer and heat it up well. Use common sense, of course, and you don't want to overheat it. I think the second most common problem I see are when these infrared LEDs burn out. Now, if you have one of these and you're wondering if it's working, there's 3 different ways you can actually test one of these. One is to use a simple remote control detector. Of course, not everybody has one of these, but as you can see, I can push the button here and this picks it up and displays it on a little light there, letting me know it's working. There's also you can use a video camera. Believe it or not, this infrared light can't be seen by my naked eye, and yet when I point it at my camera, I know you can all see this light flashing here. So if you have a video camera, that's one way to look at it. And the third and simplest way is to use some of this reflective strip. You can buy this stuff at Radio Shack or wherever they sell it. It's a reflective surface that, surprisingly, it'll change the frequency of the light when you point it at it and allow you to actually see the light waves coming off here, whereas you can't see it with your naked eye. But as you can see, when I hold the reflective strip in front of the LED here, you can actually see it lighting up. Now if you have determined that you've got a bad infrared LED, make sure that you put it in properly. They are polarity dependent, so if you put it in backwards, it's not going to work. Now sometimes the actual driving circuitry can go bad, so the LED might be fine, but the driving circuitry itself is bad. And I'm going to show you a little trick here you can use to determine whether the driver for the LED is actually working. Now what you're looking at here is just an ordinary AM radio. What I do is I turn it on, I put it on the AM band, and I tune it to a frequency where there's no sound, and I can actually hold this remote control next to the radio here, push the button, and so even though this isn't a radio frequency transmitter, a lot of devices, a lot of electronic devices rather, including electric motors, tend to give off a little radio frequency energy. So that's a neat little trick I discovered one day, and that's one way you can figure out if the driving circuitry is working. Now every once in a while you'll have a crystal that'll go out, and I've actually seen crystals go out and the light will continue to work, but it doesn't have the right code behind it. So that's rare though. I haven't seen that in a long time. And of course you want to look for the obvious bad connections on your solder terminals here. Another thing I've seen from time to time is sometimes batteries get corroded and it won't make good contact. In that case I just take a little sandpaper and sand the connections on both sides, on the PC board and on this part here. And I usually put a drop of oil on it, hoping to neutralize the acid. The other type of remote controls I see from time to time are these remotes that don't put out any infrared light at all, but they put out radio frequency energy. In other words, they transmit. So the only way I know to test one of these is to have a frequency counter and to put it right next to the frequency counter and push the on button and watch what you get. In this case I can push the button. You can see it's about 308 megahertz there. Now the most common problem I've seen with this type of a transmitter, especially pertaining to those auto alarm transmitters and the garage door openers, is oftentimes they'll have a little a connector that holds a battery in place, and they become unsoldered. They get banged around so often, and they're rather spendy to replace, and so every once in a while somebody will bring in their auto alarm remote, and I'll just resolder the connections that hold the battery in place, and that usually takes care of it. Well, that pretty much concludes my video tutorial on how to repair your own remote control. If you're enjoying these videos and you'd like to see more, I've now got my own website at tvrepairinfo.com. I put a whole index to all my videos there, as well as some videos by other people. This has been real neat since I started making these videos. A lot of you guys that are technicians have been networking with me, and we've been able to swap some information. So anytime somebody sends me something of use, I usually like to put a link to it on that website. So hopefully you'll find that helpful. Also, I've got some books listed on there as well that might interest you. Anyway, thanks again. See you next time.